The brass bell above the mercantile door jangled violently as Nora Zimmerman stormed out, her auburn hair escaping its pins in wispy tendrils that matched her frayed temper. The year was 1878, and Ogden, Utah Territory was booming with the prosperity that the Transcontinental Railroad had brought 3 years prior. But for Nora, 23 years old and suddenly alone in the world, prosperity seemed as distant as the eastern cities she'd left behind. "Miss Zimmerman," Mr. Howell, the store proprietor, called after her. "Your father's debts must be settled. You cannot simply—" "I have told you, sir, that I will pay what I can when I am able," Nora called back without breaking stride, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "But I won't be intimidated into selling my father's land for a fraction of its worth." She marched down the boardwalk, ignoring the stares from townsfolk who had undoubtedly heard about her predicament. 2 months ago, her father had succumbed to pneumonia, leaving Nora with a modest ranch 5 miles outside of town, a mountain of debt, and no family to speak of. The vultures had been circling ever since. Nora paused at the hitching post where her mare, Penny, was tethered. She stroked the horse's chestnut neck, taking a moment to compose herself. The railroad had transformed Ogden into an important junction, bringing opportunity but also men hungry for land and power. Men like Vernon Howell and Mayor Prescott, who seemed to think a woman alone was easy prey. Trouble at Howell's again? Sheriff Miller approached, his weathered face kind beneath his gray mustache. "Nothing I can't handle," Nora replied, straightening her shoulders. "Your father was a good man, Nora. He'd be proud of how you're standing your ground." "Thank you, Sheriff, but standing my ground won't feed my livestock or repair my fences." She untied Penny's reins. "Have you considered, if you're about to suggest marriage as a solution, please don't." Nora's voice was sharper than she intended. "Half the men in town have already made their offers, thinking they'd get my land as part of the bargain." Sheriff Miller raised his hands in surrender. "Actually, I was going to suggest hiring help. The Z-Bar isn't a one-person operation." Nora softened slightly. "I've tried, but I can't pay much, and most men refuse to work for a woman anyway." "Well, there's a newcomer in town. Arrived yesterday. Austin Reed's his name. Has a reputation as a solid ranch hand from Colorado way. Might be worth talking to." Nora hesitated. Hiring help meant bringing a stranger onto her property, into her life. Yet the sheriff was right, she couldn't manage alone. "Where might I find this Mr. Reed?" "Try the Silver Dollar. He was asking about work there this morning." Nora nodded her thanks and mounted Penny. The Silver Dollar wasn't a place respectable women frequented alone, but Nora had stopped worrying about appearances weeks ago when survival became her priority. The saloon's swinging doors revealed a dimly lit interior thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of spilled whiskey. Conversation stuttered to a halt as Nora entered, her skirts gathering dust from the sawdust-covered floor. She scanned the room, feeling the weight of every gaze. At the far end of the bar stood a tall man with broad shoulders, his back to her. His Stetson was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn denim coat. Nora approached, clearing her throat. "Mr. Reed." The man turned, and Nora found herself looking up into eyes the color of a summer storm, a steely blue-gray that assessed her with immediate interest. "I am," he confirmed, his voice carrying the slight drawl of a man who'd spent time in the South. "And you would be?" "Nora Zimmerman. Sheriff Miller mentioned you're looking for work." Austin Reed straightened, removing his hat in a gesture that spoke of an upbringing that valued manners. "That I am, Miss Zimmerman. I own the Z-Bar ranch outside of town. I need help with repairs, livestock, and general ranch work." She spoke directly, businesslike. "I can't offer much in wages, but there's room and board included." A smile played at the corners of his mouth, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Sheriff mentioned you might come looking. Also mentioned you're in a bind with the local businessman." Nora stiffened. "My personal affairs are not relevant to the job offer." "Partnership implies equality, Mr. Reed. I've yet to meet a man who truly believes a woman is his equal." "Then you've been meeting the wrong men." Before Nora could respond, the Z-Bar Ranch came into view. It wasn't the largest spread in Weber County, but the 160 acres provided good grazing for cattle and included fertile bottomland along a creek that never ran dry. The two-story farmhouse her father had built stood proudly, its white painted boards gleaming in the afternoon sun. Austin asked smart questions, occasionally kneeling to examine soil or inspect a fence post, demonstrating knowledge that reassured Nora. "The corral needs rebuilding before winter," he said, testing a rotted post. "And that barn roof won't last through the first heavy snow." "Can you do it?" Nora asked. Austin looked around, considering. "Yes, but not alone. You'll need at least one more hand for the heavy work." "I told you, I can barely afford to pay you." Frustration edged her voice. "I might know someone. An old friend passed through Ogden recently, heading north. I help rebuild this ranch, protect it from these town vultures, and make it profitable again. In return, I get a percentage of the profits, not just a salary. Say 20% of whatever we make above expenses." Nora's eyes narrowed. 30% sounds steep for a hired hand. "I'm offering to be considerably more than a hired hand." His confidence wasn't arrogance, but the self-assurance of a man who knew his worth. "And I suspect time is something you don't have much of, given those debts." He was right, and they both knew it. Winter was coming, and with it would come more pressure from Howell and his ilk. She needed this ranch producing income quickly. 20%, she countered. "And we draw up a proper contract with terms, including that the land remains solely in my name." Austin smiled, extending his hand. "I believe we have an agreement, Miss Zimmerman." Nora hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but not overpowering. "We do, Mr. Reed. You can start immediately. There's a small cabin behind the barn for hands. I'll get settled, then start on that corral before dark." He released her hand and tipped his hat. "And I'll write to my friend Nathan tonight. With luck, he can be here within the week." As Austin led his horse toward the barn, Nora watched him go with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She'd just taken a significant risk, trusting this stranger with not just work but with a partnership of sorts. Yet, for the first time since her father's death, she felt something other than overwhelming dread. Hope, she realized, felt like hope. True to his word, Austin began work immediately. "Started on my father's place in Texas, then rode with trail herds up to Kansas. Worked ranches in Colorado the past few years." "What brings you to Utah territory?" Austin took a sip of coffee before answering. "Looking for a place to put down roots, I suppose. I'm 32 now, getting a bit old for drifting." Nora nodded, understanding. At 23, she'd already seen how quickly life could change. "Well, I appreciate your help, Mr. Reed. I'll leave you to your meal." "Austin," he said as she turned to go, "if we're to be partners of a sort, you might as well use my given name." Unlike most men, he didn't scoff when she asked questions or wanted to learn tasks traditionally done by men. "A rancher needs to know everything about their operation," he said simply when she thanked him for showing her how to mend a saddle. "Man or woman makes no difference." On the 7th day, Austin's friend arrived. Nathan Dawson was a tall, lanky man with an easy smile and quick hands. He proved to be as hardworking as Austin had promised, and the two men tackled the barn roof properly, replacing rotted timbers and shingles while Nora kept them supplied with water and occasionally handed up tools. "You're fortunate to have found Austin," Nathan told her during a break, wiping sweat from his brow. Best cowhand I've ever worked with, and honest to a fault. I'm beginning to see that, Nora admitted. That evening, after Nathan had retired to the bunkhouse, Nora and Austin sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wasatch Mountains in hues of gold and purple. My father raised me to be independent, taught me everything he knew about ranching. When the suitors started coming around as I got older, he told me to choose carefully, that marriage should be a partnership, not a surrender. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Nora gazed up at the emerging stars. I miss him terribly. Austin's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, a gentle, comforting touch. Grief has its own time, but I promise you, Nora, we'll make sure his legacy endures. His touch should have been improper, too familiar. They see the ranch improving and realize their window of opportunity is closing. What can we do? I don't have the money to pay this so-called loan, and if they raise taxes, we fight back, Austin said firmly. First, we need legal help. There's a young lawyer in Salt Lake City who specializes in land disputes. I've sent for him. That costs money we don't have, Nora protested. I have savings, Austin said simply. Consider it an investment in our partnership. Nora stared at him, surprised by his commitment. Why are you doing all this, Austin? You could find easier work elsewhere without all this trouble. Austin's gaze was steady. Because I believe in what we're building here. And because. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I admire you, Nora. Your strength, your determination. I've never met a woman like you. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. For weeks, she'd been fighting in growing attraction to this man who treated her as an equal, who saw her strength as an asset rather than a threat to his masculinity. Now, faced with his honest admission, she found herself at a loss for words. She was saved from responding by Nathan's arrival, announcing that a rider was approaching from town. The moment broken, Nora and Austin went to meet their visitor. It was Sheriff Miller, his expression grim as he dismounted. Thought you should know, he said without preamble. Howell and Prescott are making moves. They filed a petition to foreclose on the Z-Bar for unpaid debts. Hearings set for next Monday. That's barely 5 days away, Nora exclaimed. How can they do this? Judge Reynolds owes Prescott favors, the sheriff said unhappily. And they've brought in witnesses who claim your father borrowed heavily before his death. False witnesses, Austin said flatly. Almost certainly, Sheriff Miller agreed. But it'll be your word against theirs, Miss Zimmerman. Not quite, came a new voice. They turned to see another rider approaching, a young man in a city suit, carrying a leather document case. Adam Wright, attorney at law. He introduced himself as he reached them. I believe you sent for me, Mr. Reed? Austin nodded, relief evident on his face. You made good time. Your letter suggested urgency. The lawyer dismounted, adjusting his spectacles. And I've had dealings with Mayor Prescott before. The man's tactics are predictable, if underhanded. Inside the house, Wright reviewed the loan document and listened to their story, taking detailed notes. They're overplaying their hand, he said finally. This document is clearly fraudulent, the paper's too new, and your father's signature doesn't match other legal papers I've seen. More importantly, they've rushed the foreclosure process, which gives us grounds to challenge the entire proceeding. Hope bloomed in Nora's chest. Can you help us? I believe so, Wright said confidently. But we need to prepare thoroughly. Show me every piece of documentation you have regarding the ranch's finances. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Wright built their case methodically, while Austin and Nathan continued ranch work, ensuring that when visitors from town came by ostensibly to express sympathy but really to spy, they saw a thriving operation. The night before the hearing, Nora couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch, wrapped in her shawl against the November chill, staring up at stars that seemed cold and distant. The sound of the door opening behind her didn't startle her somehow. She'd known Ogden would find her here. "You should rest," he said gently, coming to stand beside her. "I can't stop thinking about tomorrow. What if we lose?" Ogden turned to face her. "Then we appeal. And if that fails, we find another way. But we won't lose, Nora." His confidence steadied her. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen what you're made of." His voice deepened. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, man or woman. And strength like yours doesn't yield to men like Howell and Prescott." Something in his tone made Nora look up at him. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, but his eyes held a warmth that reached through her defenses. "Ogden," she whispered, not quite a question, not quite a statement. He moved closer, one hand coming up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't come to Ogden looking for anything beyond work," he said softly. "But I found you, and now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Her heart hammered in her chest. "I told you I wouldn't be owned. And I told you I'm offering partnership, not ownership," he interrupted, his smile gentle. "I don't want to possess you, Nora. I want to stand beside you, face whatever comes together, as equals." The sincerity in his voice, in his eyes, was undeniable. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ogden lowered his head. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepened as Nora responded, her arms sliding up around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nora felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her. Fear remained about tomorrow's hearing, but beneath it lay a certainty that whatever happened, she would no longer face it alone. The Weber County Courthouse was packed the next morning. It seemed half of Ogden had come to witness the proceedings. Nora sat at the front with Ogden and their lawyer, acutely aware of the whispers and stares directed their way. Mayor Prescott and Vernon Howell sat across the aisle, smug confidence evident in their postures. Judge Reynolds entered, a thin man with calculating eyes who barely acknowledged Wright's presence before calling the court to order. What followed was a masterclass in legal maneuvering. Wright immediately challenged the accelerated foreclosure process, forcing the judge to acknowledge procedural errors. When Howell presented his loan document, Wright produced evidence that the paper stock hadn't even been manufactured when the loan was supposedly made. The turning point came when Wright called a surprise witness, Howell's former clerk, who testified that he'd been instructed to create false documents after Jacob Zimmerman's death. The young man's shaking voice carried conviction as he described Howell and Prescott's plan to acquire the Z-Bar for a fraction of its worth, then sell parcels at inflated prices to railroad interests. By midday, the judge, regardless of his connection to Prescott, had no choice but to dismiss the foreclosure petition and order an investigation into the fraudulent documents. Howell stormed from the courthouse, while Prescott remained, his face a mask of contained fury. "This isn't over," he warned Nora as she passed him on her way out. "Yes, it is," she replied firmly, "unless you want your political career to end with fraud charges." Outside, well-wishers surrounded them, neighbors who had watched the proceedings, other small ranchers who had suffered similar pressures, townsfolk who resented the mayor's high-handed ways. For the first time, Nora realized they had allies she hadn't recognized. "You've won more than just your case today," Wright told her as they prepared to return to the ranch. "You've shown others that Prescott and Howell can be challenged successfully. That will change things in Ogden." "We couldn't have done it without you," Nora said gratefully. Wright smiled. "Actually, you could have. The evidence was there, I just knew how to present it. But I'm glad I could help." He glanced between Nora and Ogden. "You two have built something special out at the Z-Bar. I think your father would be proud, Miss Zimmerman." The ride back to the ranch was jubilant. Even Nathan, usually reserved, whooped with delight as they crested the ridge overlooking the Z-Bar. In the late afternoon sun, the ranch looked more beautiful than ever to Nora, not just her inheritance now, but her future. That evening they celebrated with a special dinner. Nathan showed unexpected cooking skills, producing a feast that had them all laughing and talking late into the night. When he finally excused himself to the bunkhouse, Nora and Austin were left alone by the fire. "What happens now?" Nora asked softly. Austin moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "That depends on you." "On us?" she corrected, taking his hand. "This is a partnership, remember?" His smile warmed her more than the fire. "I remember, and I've been thinking about our partnership." He hesitated, uncharacteristically nervous. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Nora's heart began to race as Austin slid from the sofa to one knee before her. "I'm not asking to own your land or control your life," he said earnestly. "I'm asking to share it, to build something together that's stronger than what either of us could create alone." He took a deep breath. "Nora Zimmerman, will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. This man, who had come into her life when she needed him most, who had fought beside her rather than for her, who saw her strength as beautiful rather than threatening, was offering exactly what her father had always wished for her: a true partnership. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Austin Reed, I will marry you." His answering smile was brilliant as he rose to gather her in his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of respect, support, and love. They were married 2 weeks later in the ranch house, with Sheriff Miller standing as Austin's best man and Nathan giving away the bride. News of their marriage spread quickly through Ogden, effectively ending any remaining schemes to take the Z-Bar. No one wanted to challenge the now united front of the Reed-Zimmerman ranch. Winter settled over Utah territory, blanketing the land in snow and giving the newlyweds time to plan for spring. Together, they developed a vision for the ranch that combined Austin's cattle expertise with breeding programs that would make the Z-Bar known throughout the territory. Nora's sharp business mind complemented Austin's practical ranching knowledge perfectly. By the time spring arrived, bringing new calves and fresh growth, the Z-Bar had transformed. New hands had been hired as the operation expanded. The house had been improved with a larger kitchen and a second bedroom, which Nora hoped would someday soon be a nursery. Austin never asked her to change the ranch name. The Z-Bar remained the Z-Bar, a testament to Jacob Zimmerman's legacy. But everyone in Weber County knew it was run by a partnership of equals, a man and woman who had found in each other not an owner, but a perfect match. On their first anniversary, Austin surprised Nora with a special gift: a new sign for the ranch entrance. Carved into the wood beneath Z-Bar Ranch were the words, "Reed and Zimmerman Partners in All Things." "Do you like it?" he asked as she traced the letters with her fingers. "It's perfect," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Just like our partnership." "Partnership," Austin agreed, kissing her forehead. "Not ownership. Never ownership." 5 years later, the Z-Bar had grown into one of the most successful ranches in Weber County. Their innovative breeding programs had produced cattle that thrived in Utah's climate, and their fair business practices had earned them respect throughout the territory. On a warm summer evening, Nora sat on the porch, watching Austin teach their 4-year-old son, Jacob, to rope a practice dummy in the yard. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played nearby, attempting to mimic her brother's efforts with a piece of string. Nathan, who had stayed on as foreman, approached from the barn. "Mail came," he said, handing Nora several envelopes, including one from that cattle buyer in Wyoming territory. Nora smiled her thanks, already thinking about the expansion opportunities the Wyoming connection might bring. As she watched her family, Austin now swinging little Elizabeth up onto his shoulders while Jacob laughed, she reflected on how far they had come. The woman who had once declared she wouldn't be owned by any man had found something far more valuable. A true partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and deep love. Together, she and Austin had created not just a successful ranch, but a family and a legacy that would endure long after them. As if sensing her thoughts, Austin looked up, meeting her gaze across the yard. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip after all these years, held the same promise it had that night by the fire. Partnership, not ownership. Equality, not dominance. Love freely given and joyfully returned. And Nora Reed, once Nora Zimmerman, knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly what her father had wished for her: a partner for life. A man who valued her strength rather than seeking to tame it, who walked beside her rather than ahead or behind. The Z-Bar Ranch would continue to flourish, a testament to what was possible when two people joined their lives not as owner and owned, but as true partners in every sense of the word.